I wouldn't program for someone to do reps of an exercise in the splits if they couldn't even get into the splits to begin with. Should you be overhead pressing or pulling? What I mean by this is, let's say overhead work is something that's reflected in what you want for your lifestyle, your sport, or your physique. Now, given that you want to be doing this type of movement in your workout, should you really be doing it? Now, there's tons of nuances to how you order or place exercises, and typically overhead movements are going to be towards the beginning of the workout, especially if they're pressing, because there's more risk of injury associated with them. However, what I am way more interested in talking about is what should we classify the prerequisites for overhead lifting patterns to be? If someone couldn't do a bodyweight squat, I wouldn't go ahead and then program or recommend for them to do one with a barbell with loaded weight on their spine while doing it. Or let's go ahead and just make the example more extreme. I wouldn't program for someone to do reps of an exercise in the splits if they couldn't even get into the splits to begin with. But yet, for some reason, everyone seems to program using pull-ups or overhead pressing in programs without first assessing whether that person can actually get their arm into that overhead position to begin with. Most people just do vertical lifts because it's in their program, or they think that that's what they have to do to achieve their results. But they don't really think as much about what you should require of your body before doing this movement to begin with. And so what should you require of your body? I would argue that if you want to directly press overhead, you should be able to directly reach overhead without compensating with your lower back, like you can see me exaggerating here. If I can only get my arms up to a 45-degree angle, but then I can compensate with my lower back, I can fake my overhead range of motion, but I can't really get there with my shoulder, and I'm putting stress on other areas instead. And so if you can't actively control and raise your arm above your head, should you really be loading it above the head? I would say no. It is not worth the risk of forcing that joint overhead with weight stacked on top of it if you can't get into that position without any weight to begin with. And this brings me to my next train of thought, which is, now that we know how to assess it and why it's important, how can we improve our overhead range of motion so that we can get back to safely performing these exercises we know and love? I'm going to explain this from the viewpoint of someone who is just struggling with overhead range of motion but is not suffering from any injuries. I would first address the restricting soft tissue. So if I'm trying to reach overhead, the tissue that's coming under a stretch will be from largely my lats. And so I choose to go in this case with a lacrosse ball, to address that soft tissue. And I'm applying a neurological input to the muscle to tell my brain back to the muscle that it can relax, that I can be here in this range of motion safely. The goal is to hang out in this range of motion for 2 minutes. And in some cases, I will pick a couple different points along the muscle, but I'm aiming to cumulative rack up that amount of time of soft tissue work on the lats. If I had a partner while I was training, I would probably use something like body tempering instead, but the lacrosse ball works great if you're on your own. Afterwards of addressing the soft tissue, I would move my arm into a comfortable stretched overhead position. And what I'm trying to do here is find pretty much my tolerable end range of motion and then just stretch and relax into here for, you guessed it, 2 minutes again. After relaxing in the stretch for over 2 minutes, I will begin a very hard isometric contraction into the ground, just building up tension. You can see I'm lightly shaking here. That's totally fine. I'm trying to strengthen the muscle in this end range stretch position before then actively lifting off of it by contracting the shortened muscle right behind my shoulder instead of that stretched muscle, the lat, down the front. I can then increase the height of the box to increase the intensity of the stretch and repeat this for as many cycles as I see fit for my current place and time in training. The idea behind this is to put in neurological inputs to the muscle to relax in areas where it's restricting your mobility, and then stretching into that position before strengthening it, telling your body that you can safely be in that range of motion. And so whether your interest is learning how to do something like a handstand, or if you just want to do overhead presses, or reach for a can of soup in the cabinet above your head, it's important to assess your overhead range of motion. Am I saying that if you can't actively raise your arms into this position, that you should stop doing exercises like the military press or the clean and jerk or the Olympic snatch? Kind of. If you absolutely love overhead pressing, but say you can only get to this far range of motion when trying to reach overhead, maybe stick to doing some high incline dumbbell pressing instead for a while you work on improving that range of motion before getting back to the directly overhead pressing. After watching this video, I want you to go and try and find somewhere with a mirror where you can watch yourself actually raise your arm overhead, or try recording yourself with your phone. After you do that and you see where your actual overhead active mobility is, ask yourself the question if you want to lower your risk of injury and improve your function by training that, or if your overhead mobility matches what your current lifestyle and training demands. Thank you for watching today's video, and if you're anything like me, good luck training your overhead mobility before your next training session.